Mark Boyd has a secret ingredient to his homestead. He has been using this ingredient now for the last 3 years, and he has grown some of the most prolific gardens I have ever seen. He grows on less than like 1/20th of an acre, yet he produces near as much food as I do out here in my pasture. He has the opportunity to show you today what his secret ingredient is and what he is doing. So this entire conversation is part of a 7-episode series with Mark as we break down his urban homestead. This is a great opportunity because episode number 7 is going to be a live Q&A with Mark as we break down his urban homestead. Yes, you are going to be able to ask him questions, but we're wanting you to ask questions here in the comment section. So yes, that is anything from how he's planned or managed his urban homestead, his history in urban homesteading. Maybe it's about our topic today, or it could be about hay bales and hay bale gardening, which is our next episode. And so you'll be able to ask all of those questions in the comment section down below. Those are going to be the first ones read in our Q&A. And I'm super excited about what our conversation is going to be. He's already provided a wealth of knowledge. So without any further ado, let's get over to the topic today on what is the secret ingredient to Mark Boyd's homestead. There's this secret ingredient that you've been holding out on. And I really wanted to deep dive on this conversation because it's misunderstood, I think, in homesteading. And I think that for those of us who have tried it, we didn't give it enough attention to take it seriously. And so talk to me about what you're doing to help your garden go just above and beyond.
Okay. Again, I have an organic farming concept. I want it natural. Part of that comes out of some health issues and others who have health issues. So I try to think of things in that term. So just because it's beautiful doesn't mean it's healthy. And so you can go to the grocery store and boy, the tomato looks great till you get it home and you slice it up and then you go, oh my. The same thing, just didn't have the flavors that I grew up with on a farm in South Georgia. So those are some of the motivators. I'm a lifelong learner. So I'm 66, nobody digs, and I'm already looking at next year's spring garden and new things and that kind of thing. What changed though this year, I started doing vermiculture, raising worms. And I have a homemade operation in that basement that I was telling you about. It's basically unfinished. I have what I call my main motel. And it's just a plastic trunk about this high and about this long, about this deep, that kind of thing, about that wide. I don't know what the weight is, pretty heavy right now.
Yeah.
And I started putting worms, raising worms in it. Red wigglers, that's the gold in Georgia, red wigglers. They give you the most bang for the buck. I started to tell y'all something a while ago on those leaves. Let me go back to it because it does figure into the vermiculture as well. When God made the trees to function as they did, the key minerals, those trace minerals that are needed for plants and for us, for good health, the deep roots of the tree take in all those nutrients and minerals. And guess where the Lord said, now here's where I want you to put it, tree, in the leaves.
Yeah.
And so as the leaves fall, the leaves, as part of the ecosystem, brings the nutrients and those trace minerals back down, and then as the leaves decompose, they put the trace minerals back down under those trees. And that's how your trees stay healthy, good portion of it. Well, I harvest the leaves, grind them up, and that gives the trace minerals and all the other things. So when the worms in the bed go snacking and do their thing with all the other stuff that I'm going to tell you that I put in there, part of what they get and part of the microorganisms, the bacteria and all of that, they get all those trace minerals. And remember, the better the diet, the better the product the worm is going to give you. Worm castings. I'm an old South Georgia farm boy, so let me get it down to where, because when I first read that, worm castings, what is that? And I'm thinking of, I don't know, y'all don't laugh at me, but I'm thinking about how does a worm break its arm and get it put in a cast? I mean, casting, what is that about? And I finally realized y'all are talking about worm poop, because that's what it's
Worm
doing.
poop doesn't sell nearly as good as
Yeah,
worm
I get
castings.
the point. But I'm just saying, what you put in, what you give the worm to eat, its diet will determine the quality of the casting that you get. So in the main motel that I've got, I give it a variety. I'll put some of these crushed leaves in there, these mulch leaves in there, but I'll also be putting all kinds of table scraps, anything that I can get. Oh, they love melons. They love squash, because the worms and the bacteria can get into that really good, and you'll be surprised at how much they multiply. I got one big motel full of worm castings right now that I'm about to put into the bed as I get them winterized, and that kind of thing. But I use those to make worm tea. You can go to the YouTube channel and find out where, I think it's the Our Worm Farm is the YouTube channel I saw it at. You can learn
We'll put a link in the description down below.
Yeah, you can learn how to take your worm castings and make worm tea. And I saw that, and I came up with this idea. Somebody else has probably got it and already improved on it. I don't claim any of this is original. But I thought, okay, I've got the big motel, and now, by the way, I've gone to two. I've got one that was, somebody was going to try vermiculture, and doesn't look like they even tried a full growing season. It's a high rise. It's got layers and everything. And they called me at Habitat for Humanity and said, we know that you do something with worms and nobody knows what to do with this thing. Could you come look at it? It still had the instructions and everything. So I've gotten that one started. I started that one about 10 days ago now, and it'll be a 5-story. Don't be real impressed. It's only going to be about 4 feet tall. But anyway, I've got that one going. I've got another one, motel that's starting, that is the exact same, casing, plastic
Dynamics,
container. Yeah. So it'll mirror the other one. But what I did that's different this year that has really, really proved effective is in those raised beds that I was telling you about, those concrete block raised beds. Every 3 to 4 feet, I put what I call a Motel 6 of worms. And I just went to Dollar General. I found a little cylinder like that, plastic. It's got a blue screwed on lid. It's about a quart, I would think, something like that, maybe a little bit more than a quart, 2 quarts. It's about this long. I took a drill and drilled holes, about spread out. They're probably spread out about 2 inches all the way around it. Made sure I left the cap like it was.
Yeah.
I didn't put a hole in the bottom, but I've got holes near the bottom because I don't want water to sit in it. But I planted one of those Motel 6s about every 3 to 4 feet down the bed. Then I put the same food I was feeding the worms inside down in the bed, down in that Motel 6 in the bed. And I go along every so often, probably once a week anyway, once every 10 days, and I fill them up again. I always sit the lid in to keep the rodents and other things
the lids
out.
keep the flies, the rodents, all the kind of the bad oddities that can get into loose food.
And the only thing that's above ground is the lid. In other words, it's buried that deep. And as you put this in, little by little, the worms start talking to their neighborhood. I mean, I don't know how they do that, but somehow they must be doing that. I don't know. Hey, listen, this guy's got a buffet, and he's got it every so often. So I have worms early in the morning, sometimes, especially in the spring when it's cool. It's almost like the worms come up on top of that bed that I've built to see me in the morning about daybreak to say, thank you, keep up the work.
Keep it up.
What we eating today? But I go along and I put all kinds of things in there, and every so often, maybe once a month, I take the water hose and I just flush out, because worms they'll eat inside the Motel 6, and for the most part, they'll go outside and poo. worm castings. But inevitably, there'll be some residue and worm castings in it, and you'll find you can't put, the full depth because it's getting full. Well, all you do is just worm tea concept.
Yeah.
Stick your water hose down there and flush it out. That sends the nutrient to the root level of the plant.
So you're almost skipping a level by having it go directly at the root level to your plants. Because again, it's submerged about 6 to 8 inches down below. So you're right at root level
It's probably,
for most of most of your vegetables.
It's about 1.5 to 2 foot deep. Because these beds are 2 concrete blocks high.
Yeah.
So this doesn't go all the way to the bottom, but it's going on down at least a foot, 1.5 feet. And I just go wash them out about once a month, and that allows me to restock them even more. And again, I put vegetable scraps in there. I also I save cardboard, anything like that.
What kind of cardboard, to be specific? Can it be printed? Can it be?
You got to be careful on the printed, though. Most of the print on cardboard today is a vegetable-based print.
Okay.
But anything that's shiny, you don't want to use that. No plastic tapes. We all get a zillion Amazon boxes. I love Amazon boxes, but I rip off all that plastic tape and all of that. Then I soak it and get it, good and wet. Let it sit a day, and then you can just rip it up in little bitty pieces and put it down in there. I squish it out. I should tell you that I squish the water out of it because you don't want to drown your worms. They don't know how to do scuba diving, so you gotta do that.
Right.
And then I start putting it and I layer it. I'll put the cardboard down. And then I might put just a little bit of nice organic soil down over it. Might put some dry leaves, just a little there. And here's the key. I didn't know this. I had to learn this. Worms, they have no teeth. Well, I kind of knew that as a farm boy, but I never thought about why that would make a difference in how the worm could make castings more efficiently and faster. The sand, and you have to make sure you use a sand that's not been treated with chemicals, but you can just buy it from, a supply store.
Home Depot, Lowe's.
And you just take just a little, like a tablespoon, if that much, in each Motel 6 every so often, and you sprinkle it with a little sand. And as they eat, they get some of the grains of sand in it, and it's like having teeth. It helps them to break down what they're consuming.
Okay.
And so I stack it like that all the way up to the top, and then I put the lid in and I turn it 1/2 turn. Another thing I learned, this will help you. Do not, because you're a strong person, tighten that lid tight, thinking, oh boy, that's good. Because when the heat from the sun hits the Motel 6, it only can get to the lid. So it heats the lid up, but it expands, and it's like it super glued it on.
Yeah.
And you almost have to rip up the Motel to get the top off.
Right.
But if all you need to do is just turn it just a little bit, and the rodent can't pick it up if a squirrel or whatever tries to.
Right.
But that's the key to the garden. And I'll give you a recent example. My big Italian squash that are over the trellis and everything else, everything's dying away and they're dried vines, and I'm starting to break it down. And so I'm getting ready to do the breakdown to get ready for spring. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and work on this bed, even though the Italian squash, that's where they are, even though they're growing all the way on the other side of that cattle panel. I'll just go ahead and get started on this bed. So my granddaughters were over, little granddaughters, and they wanted to help Granddaddy with gardening. So we got out there, we put in a little bit of fresh soil in there and some stuff like that. But I stuffed the Motels, but before I did, they needed washing out, again, just to get rid of all the other stuff. So I don't pull them out. Again, I just stick a water hose in there and wash them out. Then I filled them up with vegetable scraps and that kind of thing like we just described. Put the lid on. Seriously, the leaves on the squash were beginning to yellow because we're getting late in the season.
Yeah.
I went out in less than 24 hours. Those squash have got the deepest, magnificent colored leaves, and I had like 5 squash about that long growing that I found while I was working at that bed.
Right.
I go back out like a week later, I must have 20 squash that are this long, and I've got some I saw right before I left coming out here of this long already.
Yeah.
The only thing I did differently was I restocked and I flushed,
Yeah.
the Motel 6 is out.
It's a great way to.
And he picked it up instantly.
I really like that the way that you're flushing it out. I mean, again, you're adding that nutrients in. Some guys are taking some of that. They'll get from the hotel, the big one, and they'll take that over, and then they'll brew that, if you will, inside some water for 24 hours.
Right.
They're going out, but they're having to lug 5-gallon pails out to their garden to water their stuff. And what you're doing is kind of allowing the garden just to be a garden, just like Joel Salatin says, let the marvelous pig of a pig be a pig. You're doing the same thing with your garden. You're letting the worm be a worm and letting it be in its natural habitat and let it doing its thing. And ultimately, when we let the worm be a worm, you have this amazing end product. And again,
Right.
I think it's like we have a good garden, but every time I see his garden, I'm like, I'm just not on that level
good.
every time.
It's not that good. I'm
It's
still learning.
so good.
Still learning. And you may be questioning, well, what do I do with the worm castings that are made in the big motel in the basement? I do container gardening as well, and so I don't have the Motel 6 in the containers because again, some of them are 5-gallon buckets, some of them are a little bit larger, but I use the worm castings from the big motel to do the same principle that we're talking about,
Right.
to provide the plants in the containers. So that's how I use mine. And I have some neighbors who walk by my front yard and say, how come your flowers, and they are still in full bloom this late in the season? I've been surprised they're that way. What's the difference this year as to why they've been walking by my yard many years, those that have been living there long. They can see the difference. Why are my flowers so robust and blooming for so long? I'm telling you my secret right now. It's called this big motel for worms in my basement. And all I did was just take a little scoop out and mix it in with the soil that I was going to use, and it feeds them. And that's been the key to what I've done. It also helps, by the way, with insects and pests that plague your garden. I've had so little trouble with pests. The only thing I've had was the squash bugs. That was on the yellow variety of squash, and on the scallop squash, the bugs will try and attack the Italian squash. One, it is so, it spreads, it vines. And when I say vines, I don't mean just small, I'm talking vines. This thing will run 12, 15 feet, especially the way I'm fertilizing it. But everywhere it just starts producing. And what makes the plants more resistant? The only thing I can explain, because I'm not using any sprays, any chemicals, nothing's changed except those worm castings.
Yeah. I think it's providing in the nutrients. It's kind of like having a super healthy diet. You're less likely to catch diseases and catch the cold or whatever it might be. I think the common pushback is with vermiculture is there's a fear of the smell. But I was about to say, and that's what I kind of wanted to point out, that honestly, like, I could be standing right beside his vermiculture large hotel, and there's thousands of worms in there at this point. Like, you just pull back literally like a millimeter of soil and you just see thousands of worms right there. You could be standing right there and have no idea that you're standing there right beside those worms. And I think that's done by actively giving them the right item. It's not always just giving them like raw produce. It's also, so tell me about, like, when you bring stuff down there to the hotel, what are you doing to it to help keep it from having that smell? Because I've been around some that it smells like you're just kind of throwing the food outside on your back deck. So there's obviously some mistakes that also leads to other problems, that you have down the road, which could include diseases inside of your soil. Things can go really wrong. So tell us about, like, your process for when you're putting food to be broken down in that large hotel. What's that process look like?
Well, when you smell something like rotting food from the motel worms, where I'm raising the worms, that would be an indication problem. The odor is a wonderful gift to you, telling you need to make an adjustment, and here's what you need to do. You got to remember, you got to have drain holes. You don't need a lot of them, but you got to have drain holes because worms don't know how to swim. And so there's got to be a way for your motel to drain. Another tip, somebody told me this, I did it. All you do is just put a pan down in there and slant the motel slightly. You don't need a big slant, but a slight, and I've got holes down there. So should I put a little bit too much water, because you're going to keep it moist, but not wet.
Yeah.
Moist. And should there be a little bit, you just made yourself some worm tea.
Yeah.
So I use that in the garden too. I gather that up every so often and put that in there. But again, what you need to do is add more carbon. So I need to put some more of those leaves in there, or I need to take and get some cardboard, wet it like I said, squish the water out of it. And by the way, if you can, this is another change I made this year. I just thought of it just then. I bought a filter because I live in the county water system, which has all the chemicals that you would have. But you know, a guy who owns an RV and travels, and he and his family camp, explained that they couldn't always determine when they pulled into a park or an RV park or wherever, state park, whatever, they couldn't determine how clean the water was and how pure it was. And he wanted to make sure his family, you know, didn't stand the chance. So he bought a filter that he got off of Amazon. It's made for RVs primarily. That's the picture I saw. It cost me like, I don't know, $9. And I added it to the one faucet on the back of my house where I get all my water. So my water doesn't have all the
hard chemicals. There's everything from
what is it?
Chlorine.
Chlorine. I don't have any of that in
Yeah.
it. So worms, you're going to need to use distilled water if you don't do that, because those will affect the life of the worm and the health of the worm. So I should have said that. But again, if it has an odor, that just tells you you need to add more carbon.
Yeah.
So it can be cardboard, it can be wet cardboard, it can be leaves that, again, you want to dampen some, that kind of thing. Just add more, and don't overfeed your worms. Don't feed your worms more than once a week.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
Don't overfeed
I think
them.
a lot of people's tendency is just to keep chunking food in there.
Right.
What happens is that one, food kind of rises to the top a little bit. So once that food is at the top layer, that means insects and everything else are going to have access to it. And so the last thing you want is house flies and everything else touching that top layer. To me, when I smell that, that lets me know that there's house flies and things are getting in there. And
let me tell you, on the motel, the big motels, this is what I do. This time, I'm going to put whatever it is I'm putting in, kitchen scraps, that kind of thing. If it's eggshells, remember now that the worm has no teeth. The eggshells are super important. The calcium, your plant needs it, everything else needs it, but you're going to have to crush those eggs shells as fine as you can get them. If you can get them more like a grain of salt, all power to you. But I'm going to, at one end of the, I've got a rectangular motel right here. On this end, I'm going to pull back whatever's in there, castings, whatever's still in there. I'm going to pull back and make me a trench right on this end. That's where I'm going to put the new product. And then I'm going to take whatever I took out from there and maybe a little bit more, and I'm going to cover the food I just put in there at least an inch or two.
Right. I think that's where a lot of people fail. Is they just go in it, throw some stuff in the bucket, throw a lid on it.
And then the next week I'll go to the next time I feed them, and it may not, I'll go down and look to see if they need more food.
Right.
And sometimes you say, well, what are you going to do with it? I just put it in a 5-gallon bucket and put a top on that lid. Same worm, the same food grade bucket.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. But remember, I got Motel 6s. They all need food too. So
yeah, I'm kind of divvy it out.
Yeah. Let me go back and tell you real quickly before I forget it. I was telling you about those giant Thai elephant ears that grow these mega leaves that are like this. And of course, they grow stalks like that to hold them
they're
up.
Huge.
And,
they're huge.
And they just multiply and grow, and man, I got them. I was waiting until they would get yellow, and then the wind would break them down and they would dry, and then I would cut them loose, and I was just putting them back there with a pile of stuff that really, I'm just waiting to go back into the woods on the way back side of my property. And this year because I was scrounging when we got the drought in Georgia, I was scrounging to find enough green.
Yeah.
By the way, you can use alfalfa pellets that you can get from
Yeah, that's a trick that I've seen. That
Tractor Supply.
We saw some success in with our crop row. We actually whipped those into our crop rows after watching a YouTube video and had some pretty good results from it. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it definitely boosted
so that's
the
a
soil.
fallback if I can't. If I don't have greens in the winter, I've already got a couple of bags of alfalfa, pellets ready, and I will soak them in that water again that I've already filtered. I will soak it, let it get a little soft, and then I'll put them in my Motel 6, and if I need them, I'll put them in my big motels down there.
See, I think it works better for you because the problem with the alfalfa pellets that we saw is that not all alfalfa pellets are created equal.
It's true.
And some of them still have like actual seedlings and things like that that's been pulverized up in there, but they can still germinate. I think by putting them through the process of your worm casings, that the heat and everything breaks it down to where I think it's almost like a great worm feed because you're breaking down that seedling to a point where it can't be. It's going to turn it down into to nitrogen, or it's going to break it down into compost versus keeping it in its seedling form.
Going back to the Thai elephant ears, I'm not sure. This year, as they start to begin to turn yellow, I go ahead and cut them off about that far up above the bulb, that's above the ground. And even though they got this big stem, all of that, then I take a knife and I take the stem and I chip it up in little tiny pieces. I take the leaves, the giant leaves, and I do the same thing. I break it up, and they're more thin strips of varying lengths, and I stuff them into my Motel 6s, and I can use them in my big motel if I run out of stuff there. And this was an experiment because I didn't know if they'd eat them. I thought, well, I don't know if the worms in Georgia would understand something that's planted in Thailand, and it's more native to that part of the world. But I thought it's green, and they need green, and the stems are made to transport water, which a worm likes, and nutrients. Boy, do the worms like Thai elephant leaves.
Yeah.
Dude.
That water content's got to be really good as well.
And so they broke those down. It was like, oh my goodness, you've been holding out on us.
Yeah.
And so they break that down. And so now, rather than just having no use for those big leaves as they begin to yellow, now I find those will go right into your garden.
And you've got so many of them too.
Like I got so many of them.
You could probably, in essence, cut them. If you had too many that you're using at one time, you could cut them and maybe hang them. And then as you needed them, you could chip them up and use them as well.
Green is what I'm looking for. I got plenty of brown with the leaves coming off the trees. I could still use them that way, but I was looking for green. I was desperate for coming up with green. And so as long as I got it, right now I've got enough to take me, even if we get a frost pretty soon, I probably have got enough of the big Thai leaves to take me into the new year easy.
Very nice.
That'll still have green in them because I'll put a little water down.
Right.
Bring them inside the leaves once I cut them off and that kind of thing.
Mark is one of the most prolific growers that I have ever met. I have met hundreds and hundreds of gardeners throughout my homesteading time, and none of them grow with the same passion, enthusiasm, technicality, and design as much as Mark Boyd. I'm very proud to not just call him a fellow homesteader. I'm very proud that I get to call him Dad. My dad has been an inspiration for us here on the homestead. You saw the pictures. They don't lie. He's obviously doing something really special there. And again, it all comes down to vermiculture, growing his worms. He talks about them as if they're like his grandkids. Sometimes I wonder where they stack up versus where I stack up in the farm. I used to be the favorite son. Then I hear him talk about these worms, and I don't know sometimes where I sit on the family totem pole. But if you want to hear more about this conversation, again, you have the opportunity to watch the entire clip, full hour and a half, unedited, ready to go, entire conversation where you can learn about Mark Boyd's history, growing in an urban homesteading, planning inside of an urban homestead, and of course this vermiculture conversation, hay bale gardening, and more in this video right here. And you can deep dive there. Again, it's a full hour and a half long conversation. If you want to skip the line, Or if you want to go on to the next conversation, which is about hay bale gardening, make sure you click right here because hay bale gardens have been a massive success. And this is kind of a tip of the iceberg for a larger conversation that we're going to be having in the future. So again, if you have any questions that you want answered in that future episode, make sure that you list them down below. And we look forward to seeing you next time here on Homesteading Chef.